This is the Montana Outdoor Podcast, brought to you in part by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. And by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Now, get ready for more fascinating topics and the most interesting people you will ever find in Montana's great outdoors. We offer new podcasts most every Saturday. You can get a link to these podcasts by going to our website, montanooutdoor.com, or by going to our Facebook page, or just send an email to downrigger at montanooutdoor.com and say send a link to my email. It's that simple. Now let's head out with your host, Downrigger Dale, and see what's going on in Montana's great outdoors.
Thank you very much, Manny. Welcome into the Montana Outdoor Podcast Studio. So good to have all of you along with us again as we go and do some more exploration of Montana's great outdoors. I want to give a special welcome to the men and women of the United States Armed Forces that are deployed all across the world. It is just an honor that so many of you tune into this podcast, and I hope this brings a little bit of home back to you as you protect all of us all across the world. Also, a big thank you to our wonderful veterans that are listening, and thank you for your incredible service. To everyone listening here, I got a quick favor to ask you before we get into the podcast, and that is please share this podcast on social media and with your family and friends. That helps us out a ton. And also, for those of you that would like to see this on video, that's something new we added just a few weeks ago. So the podcast is now on video, and you can catch that on YouTube. And I'll put a link in the podcast description there for those of you listening in audio if you want to listen later in video, because we'll see if we can share a few pictures and things as we go along. And sometimes you get a kind of an interesting view of different things that we talk about here. So let's talk a bit about what we're going to talk about. Last week, we had on Steve Darlington, and he is with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we were talking about Fresno Reservoir and water levels and all kinds of things as they continue to try to get all that done on the failure of the St. Mary's siphon and the Milk River project, and pretty complex, major project. And as a result, one of the things in our discussion we talked about, and I'll put up a picture of this, but Steve had shared a picture of a pretty large whirlpool that had formed as they're dropping the level of Fresno Reservoir. And we started talking a little bit about, how that might affect some of the fish populations, and especially since, we've got drought conditions on top of other things. So will that affect? And our guest today, his name came up in that discussion. His name is Cody Nagel, and he is a fisheries biologist for FWP. And he said, Cody's probably going to be a better one to ask. And I had already had a message into Cody about that. So let's bring Cody in. Cody, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been busy with all that you have going on. Before we get into all the health of our fisheries around the Region 6 and the area that you cover in the kind of the Havre area and across the High Line, tell us a bit about yourself, what you do for the FWP and all that.
Yeah, well, thanks, Rigger. I've been with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks in the Havre area as the fisheries biologist since 2008. I cut my teeth and was introduced to the recreation and fishing world back in North Dakota. I grew up in Bismarck, so fishing that Missouri River system, that's kind of where I piqued my interest in fish and carried that through a career with FWP now. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the area that you cover, that you cover the paddlefish and in the Missouri, and that's from the Fort Peck Dam going upstream, if I got that right. And then you also cover basically the Milk River Basin from, what is it, about Fresno to Hinsdale? Is that where your cover mostly?
Yeah, yep. So my general management area is kind of north central Montana, Hill, Blaine, and Phillips counties. So I got the Milk River Basin essentially from the eastern crossing where it comes down from Alberta above Fresno all the way over to Hinsdale, and then all the streams and creeks and the Bear Paws and Little Rocky Mountains, all the pond fisheries up in this area. And then, yes, that paddlefish population above Fort Peck Dam.
And we're going to talk a bit about paddle fishing, see how that season's been going in that. But let's first get into talking a little bit about that discussion that I had with Steve Darlington and Fresno Reservoir. He had showed the picture of that whirlpool, and I've got it up on the screen now. So in that picture that I have up, we're looking at this whirlpool. Is that still there, or has that gone away, or is it still?
Yeah. So there's still a slight whirlpool going on out there right now. I would expect that to go away here though in the next couple days. The releases of water are starting to drop right now. So I would expect probably in the next day or two that they'll probably have minimum flows going out of there, and the amount of water, unless that whirlpool won't be as bad.
Now, are fish getting sucked down that whirlpool, do you think?
And we've seen this on a lot of our reservoir systems, when whether it's a high water event or a drawdown scenario, there is some level of fish loss or flushing that will occur, whether it's over a spillway or through an outlet structure. I mean, fish sense that pull of that water, which kind of will attract them. And then,
Really?
yeah, yep. And then you're dealing with different sizes of fish. Right now, with it being kind of early or late spring, early summer, I mean, we have some small fish in the system yet that were just hatched this spring. So, they're not as strong as swimmers. So if they get sucked into that, it's very hard for them to swim out of it. Larger fish, though, they might be able to swim out of that and thus avoid getting flushed out of the
Mhm.
system.
So would they survive going through that whirlpool?
Yeah. So the one thing that's unique with Fresno is it doesn't have electric hydropower on it right now. So you don't have those turbine systems in there that sometimes can chop or disorient fish. There might be some level of mortality, but it wouldn't be as high as, say, a dam that has, maybe some turbine system or a hydroelectric
Yeah. Okay.
system. Yeah.
So they would take kind of a wild ride and then what, just
Yeah.
end up in the milk there?
Yep. They'll end up just getting released down into the Milk River. The only time that I've physically seen any sort of fish kill through that dam system is like early in the spring, like when there's still ice on the reservoir, the water's deep, and there's kind of a barometric barotrauma that occurs where those fish get sucked down, and the pressure is what ends up being the mortality of it, not necessarily the trip through the dam.
Mm. And so when we see a whirlpool like that, I start getting comments from anglers, and I guess I kind of, and I love all of you that listen, don't get me wrong, but I kind of classify some of you anglers as glass is half full, some are the glass is half empty or completely empty. And some people say, oh well, that's going to suck all the fish out of Fresno. We aren't going to have any more fish in there. And do they really have to do this? And I think Steve pretty much answered the question of, do we really have to do this? I mean, they've got to get water down so farmers can irrigate. We just don't have much water coming into the Milk River from the St. Mary siphon, because that blew up a little less than a year ago. And so, yeah, you got to do what you got to do. The farmers we got to have our crops. In fact, from what Steve had said, they're probably only going to get water for about the first cutting and that's going to be about it, just because combine the drought and the St. Mary's siphon issue. And so tell us a bit about how you feel the overall health of the fish population is in Fresno, given the challenges we got going on here.
Yeah. So, and that's a good question. I think you almost have to take a step back first and just kind of see how that reservoir has historically been managed, water operations wise, and kind of the age of that reservoir, the amount of sedimentation that has occurred over the last 100 years. One, we're dealing with a reservoir that's lost a third of its storage capacity. It's not as deep as it once was when it was originally built. But then on top of that, on average, that reservoir usually is drawn down about 20 plus feet every year. And that usually occurs in August. A little bit different scenario this year. It's down about 30 feet right now. Probably going to lose another couple of feet yet before it's all said and done. But it's a little bit different in that historically, when these big drawdowns occur, it happens in August or September, and then you have to go through an entire winter under these low pool elevations. This year, with that siphon being repaired and hopefully water getting moved here in the next few weeks, we're actually going to get to see, a refill of some sort happen through the summer into the fall, which will set things up going into next year better than it has historically. So I guess, there is a silver lining in all of it, but there will be impacts for sure. Yeah.
And to deal with those impacts, have you guys had any plan? Are you going to do any kind of extra stocking into that reservoir, things like that?
Yeah. So there is a plan. We'll see. We're going to watch and see exactly where we end up with our pool elevations here in the next couple weeks. I will be having crews out there. We're going to be monitoring water quality, so dissolved oxygen levels. Water temps is going to be a big thing during that time frame here, where that low water is occurring, but we're waiting for that supplemental water to show up. How long is that time period going to be, and how hot is it going to get? Because that could have major impacts on the fish that remain in the system. Probably going to try to get out there and do a little bit of netting to see what we have before the refill happens, and then some additional netting and surveys in September when more water's in the system, just to kind of give us a baseline of where we're at moving forward from this year. But yes, we do have plans on trying to get some fish stocked. We are looking to stock some walleye here towards the end of the month. It's really going to depend on if our hatchery trucks can get close to the water. Yeah. So that'll be a big thing. But we also wanted to wait too, because we didn't want to put any stocked fish in there with outflows being high, and we're just sending those fish right down the Milk River.
Right. Yeah.
So that's, and then we're also talking with Miles City Hatchery too, to see, potentially if there's some surplus or leftover yellow perch or black crappie, so that we can start to reestablish that forage base yet this year. Those would probably be stocked sometime in late July, early August. So, already trying to look to the future and get things reestablished as quickly as possible.
Great. How about access with these low waters? You just mentioned, can a hatchery truck even get close enough, things like that. So for fishermen, are they able to launch boats? Are campgrounds or areas around fishing access sites around Fresno and, well, I guess even the Milk River system? What's that like right now? And what do you foresee going through the summer?
Yeah. I mean, the campgrounds are all going to be open. You can use them. The access to the water though might be difficult. When the water does get this low, it gets really mucky down near the water. You sink really quick. But you can still get to it. Boat access is going to be difficult though, probably for the next month and a half to 2 months until some of that supplemental water hits the system and that refill begins. Oh, but yeah, I would say access is going to be marginal at best here for the next couple of months.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I, as an angler, you can give it a try, but there's going to be some challenges. Like you say, you're going to sink into soft ground, things like that. You need to be pretty careful with those kind of things. So I guess overall, maybe is it a better idea for anglers to kind of pick another spot for a month or two until things get stabilized?
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be a bad idea, at least on Fresno. I think access on Nelson will be okay for the summer. But yeah, Fresno's going to be a little more of a challenge.
So let's talk a bit about Nelson. So, like you say, Nelson might have some effects there as far as some accessibilities and that. One thing that Steve Darlington had brought up is Nelson has a bit of advantage in that it kind of has its own little what did he call it? Kind of its own little area where that holds water within the reservoir. So it might get through this drought at time and all this water takedown time a little better. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, and Steve nailed it. It kind of has a natural conservation pool, we'll
Yeah, there
say.
you go. That's
Yeah, yep. Where, they just how Nelson lays out, you know, there's a pretty significant amount of water that they just can't get to just based on how it's laid out. Again, another silver lining with some of these drought years is that it gives these reservoirs a chance to establish some really good terrestrial vegetation up in that littoral zone in those shallow water areas, so that, it kind of sets the stage when the water does come back. There's an enormous amount of terrestrial vegetation that gets inundated with that water, which just makes a huge boost to the entire water system in that fish community. You'll see big, better spawning habitat and this trophic upsurge, macrophytes, zooplankton, and you get this baseline established for young fish, which leads to better growth rates and a better overall fish community in the long run.
Hmm. Okay. So, like you say, there are a few silver linings around this. How about the Milk River area for the area of the Milk River that you're covering that basin there? How is it holding up with the challenges of drought and the whole St. Mary's siphon issue and that? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the Milk River, you almost got to like break it up into a couple different sections. There's a lot of low head dams and weirs. Fresno is an on-stream dam, where when you move down to Nelson, it's kind of off stream. It's not on the Milk River. It's kind of off and gets fed through a canal system. That's where that gets supplemented. But, below Fresno Dam, we still have a lot of major tributaries coming out of the Bear Paw Mountains, out of southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, that are going to, maintain flows below Fresno Dam through the summer. So I'm not too concerned about that. That's actually a pretty good fishery. Below Fresno Dam, you're looking at high densities of walleye, northern pike, smallmouth bass. And then as you move down through Dodson and into Malta, then you start running into like a catfish fishery and a
Yeah.
bunch of other species that come out of the Missouri River up into the Milk. The one section of the Milk River that we've been keeping a really close eye on is that stretch upstream of Fresno that really relies on that supplemental water and Mother Nature. And we just, last year, that section of river essentially went dry. And that river is made up of a lot of native species, long-nosed suckers, flathead chubs, sauger, burbot. And, it just, to see that completely dry, it was tough to see. And there was some fish kills that occurred up in there. So hopefully some of those fish did find some refuge around Milk River, Alberta, in some pool habitats or something to keep that that native species population thriving moving forward.
Well, and I guess that's one of the things we forget is, fish aren't stupid. When they sense levels going down, they kind of naturally seek out where to go next, right?
Yep, they do. And again, habitat's super important, whether it's on a reservoir system, a natural lake, or a river. And those pool habitats become really important. And if you don't have those fish have nowhere to go. They just end up on a dry sandbar. Yeah.
Yeah. Then the critters around the area, they get a free lunch, as they say.
The birds and raccoons eat really well for a few weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So overall, looking at, and before we move off of like Fresno and Nelson a bit, because Nelson's for anglers is an important reservoir in that often it kind of becomes, one, it is a destination reservoir for a lot of anglers. It is good fishing. And this year, from the reports that I've got back from anglers, the fishing's been pretty darn good on Nelson. And then for anglers that really love to spend most of their time on Fort Peck, when the wind happens and they get blown off of there, Nelson becomes a real option for a lot of anglers, and they'll head there, especially seeking walleye. How do you feel, Nelson, overall, that the health of that fishery is, and how well will that maintain through the summer, do you feel? I know it's
Yeah.
an educated guess, but
Yeah. No, Nelson's a phenomenal fishery. I call it a 4-season fishery. I mean, it fishes really well in the wintertime. It fishes well in the spring, summer, fall. It's a multi-species fishery. I mean, people love to target walleye there, but there's a really good pike population in there, really good perch population. And, we're starting to see a growing smallmouth bass population as well. So yeah, it is. It's truly a phenomenal fishery year round.
yeah, I know that was a big concern with some of our anglers that send me emails on a regular basis, and they're like, oh, well, is Nelson going to be okay? And so that's good to hear that, it should maintain. And I know the good thing is you and Bureau of Reclamation and all that, everyone's been keeping a close eye on this. And, I know that, Steve had, tried his best to assure us, they're doing everything they can to try to keep everything going. Of course, their obligation is for what these reservoirs were created for, which is irrigation and that, but they do still try to keep an eye on the wildlife. And do you guys coordinate with them quite often as far as for the fishery side of it? And that, I know they kind of get pulled both ways, but
Yeah. No, you bring up a good point, and kind of like you said, there's designations and purposes for that water right now, and reclamation, and even the irrigators across the Highline. I mean, they care about the recreation. When you run into a situation like we've been in here recently, I think Reclamation's done a really good job of keeping us informed on what the plan is going to be, what the water levels are going to look like. And it's given us an opportunity to plan ahead and be prepared so that we can do our job and get these fisheries reestablished and rebounded as quickly as we can. Yeah, it's been a good relationship.
Okay. That's good to hear. We're going to take a quick break. I wanted to get a chance to talk a little bit about one of our sponsors who has just been fantastic. They're another one that this podcast would not be here if it wasn't for Superior Hardwoods of Montana. They say they don't make them like they used to, but at Superior Hardwoods of Montana, that's kind of the whole point. This isn't just a lumber yard. We're talking about 11 acres of reclaimed wood. Wall paneling, flooring, trim, beams, slabs, you name it. Every single piece has a story behind it. old barns, historic homesteads, long-forgotten factories. This wood has been places, and now it can be part of your story too. Maybe you're building a home, remodeling a room, or just putting together that dream project you've had on the back burner. Superior Hardwoods of Montana can help bring it to life. They can even custom mill it to fit your exact vision because real craftsmanship never goes out of style. And here's the thing, you're not just getting character and beauty when you choose reclaimed wood, you're reclaiming American history. You're giving something old a brand new chapter with values that never go out of style. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Whether you're a contractor, a weekend DIYer, or someone who just loves a one-of-a-kind piece of wood, Superior Hardwoods is open to the public and ready to help. Exotic woods, live-edge slabs, pre-finished and unfinished flooring, it's all in stock and ready to go. Need help picking out the right material? Just ask. Their team has been doing it since 1977, and they know how to guide you through the woods, literally and figuratively. Swing by their beautiful showroom at 5120 Highway 93 South in Missoula, or check them out online at superior-hardwoods.com. I promise you, you'll leave inspired. That's Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Local, knowledgeable, family-run, and ready to help you build something that lasts. Let them help guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. Superior Hardwoods of Montana. Go see him. We are back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast. Cody Nagel is my guest, and we're talking about the Milk River Basin, talking about Fresno and of course, Nelson and that. I want to shift gears a little bit, Cody, and talk about paddlefish. The fisheries biologist, you guys have to kind of be multifaceted and that you deal with everything from the tiny little microscopic stuff that fish feed on all the way to these great big huge paddlefish, which amazes me. In the Missouri River, you, as I mentioned before, your main area is from Fort Peck Dam upstream. Now, that season got underway May 1st and ends June 15th, correct?
Yep, you're right.
Okay. Now, there were a whole bunch of rule changes, and I think we have covered those, hopefully. Those of you that want to send me emails, by all means do, and I'll get your questions answered, and we will try to get another update on anything from what you email me, everyone, and I'll try to make sure we get those answered. But from your perspective, you don't really get so much into the rule side of it, but what was the reason for the major rule changes as far as what you were explaining?
Yeah. So again, I think we got to just take a step back when it just comes to paddlefish, and then as a species, and then as a recreational opportunity, and then kind of how the Montana FWP's approach has been with that species for many, many years now. There's been several rule changes and regulation changes, even since I showed up in 2008, whether it's changes to season structure, limits on gaff use. We went to snagged and released fish now have to stay partially submerged in the water. We've kind of changed how our harvest and season structures want to be managed between the yellow tag on the Yellowstone and the white tag on the Missouri River, where I oversee. And then, we've added a new green tag below Fort Peck Dam now that kind of coincides with the yellow tag in terms of harvest. And a lot of that just comes back to a long-lived species, an iconic big river native fish that anglers can still enjoy, and trying to balance sustainability of that population moving forward, given some of the challenges that they have just in terms of reproduction and all these other requirements that need to be met for them to thrive, while also allowing anglers the ability to go out there and enjoy them, whether that's to harvest the fish, the opportunity to harvest a fish, or the opportunity to go out there and snag and release a paddlefish.
Yeah.
So that's the balance, and a lot of our regulations and rules center around that. How do we sustain this iconic fish while also allowing public opportunity?
Yeah. And I know that that has to be, a bit of a juggling act, in that the paddlefish, and we'll get into some more of the characteristics in a minute, but they've had some challenges, in that they, when God put them in there, there weren't dams, there weren't a lot of those things, so there's some of those challenges that you've had to deal with. But I know one of the emails I got from one of our listeners said, "Geez, those things." The regulations got so confusing. It's almost like they wanted to confuse us. Now, obviously, that was not the intent, but what have you heard as far as the conversations around the area? Have anglers kind of adopted to this? Are they figuring it out?
Yeah, no, they are figuring it out. And when we do regulation changes and stuff, I mean, we try our best to make sure there's some consistency between the different snag fisheries and populations. But at the same time, there's also certain circumstances where, what might work on the Missouri River above Fort Peck doesn't work for the Yellowstone. So, there might be a little bit of deviation from time to time, but our intent is never to make things more complicated. If nothing else, we're trying to make it easier and more comprehensible and understandable, so people can just go out there and enjoy the opportunity rather than worrying about all the regulations. But sometimes that's hard to balance.
Yeah. But on the other side, this kind of emphasizes the fact that when you're asked for public comment, give that comment, because I know for a fact you guys rely heavily on that, from what anglers are telling you and what they're experiencing, and trying to set some of those plans. So I really, and I know I beat this drum really hard on this podcast, but I just can't stress it enough that, when you get an opportunity as anglers, because, I'm not discounting your frustration at all. And I won't lie, sometimes I get frustrated with changes. We all get territorial, and that's my area, and I was used to doing it this way. And so I hear you, but things got to change to make sure we keep that balance. So just remember, folks, when they're saying, "Hey, we want this this input on this change or ideas or thoughts," they're not saying that just to say it because they have to. They're saying it because they really want to know. I know that I'm sure, get comments, and that those are helpful to you, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And you hit the nail on the head right there. During the last regulation cycle, we allowed the public the opportunity to make proposals to the department on certain regulations. And I believe at least 2 of those paddlefish regulations stemmed from public comment, and they were actually submitted as public proposals. FWP looked them over and said, yes, these make sense both biologically, and we carried them moving forward, and they were moved by the public.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Overall, how has the paddlefish season gone? And do you have an idea as far as where you're at quota wise for your area?
Yeah. The paddlefish season has, it's been okay. The one thing that we really ran into, at least on the upper Missouri River this year, is we kind of came in with some low flows, which kept the fish down near the headwaters of Fort Peck, and they didn't come up the river until about the second week of the season. And then flows jumped a little bit to about 10, 11,000 CFS, which usually gets the fish up around the Fred Robinson Bridge area. But then the flows kind of just went flat right at that time, about the third week of May. And anglers did really good for about a 3-4 week period there. And now we're starting to see flows go back down again. I think we're right around 7,000 CFS historically at this time of year, we're around 20,000 CFS.
Mm.
So, in terms of a snagging season, I would call it a fair year. But in terms of like the flows we'd like to see for spawning success and things like that for the fish, it hasn't been a good one. But yeah, and then when it comes to the harvest cap, yeah, we do have a harvest cap on the Upper Missouri River. We're trying to harvest or see a mortality of no more than 500 paddlefish each year. How we do it a little bit differently though on the Upper Missouri River is we do it through a lottery tag system.
Right.
So every year we send out, 1,000 people are put in for that tag, and we give out 1,000 harvest tags. But we don't close the season down. If you drew a harvest tag, you get to go and try to harvest a fish. But we try to keep that running average below 500, and we've been able to do that. And we've been under that system now since 2016, and it's been working really well.
Mhm. And do you know how many have been harvested so far then?
So on average, we usually it's typically somewhere between 375 and 475 fish is what we typically for a harvest.
I wish all those that have a tag for that area good luck, and by all means be sure and send us pictures. I love to be able to show pictures on future podcasts, and of course we love to post them on montanooutdoor.com. So send us those pictures because those are awesome. Now, when anglers decide to make the trip, and I talk to anglers, of course, all across the state of Montana and even in Wyoming, and that I also do some broadcasts for areas of Wyoming and the Dakotas and they will travel all the way up there. People come from all over. That's an iconic thing. You get that tag, and you're like, all right, here I go. And then you get skunked, and you're like, dang, I spent all that time and money. What would you say are some of the most common mistakes that us anglers make that cause us to get skunked going after those big paddlefish?
Yeah. So the main thing with paddlefish is just understanding the areas where those fish are going to be in terms of relation to flows. When we don't have really good flows, it keeps the fish in downstream locations. Sometimes they're just hard to be, the accessibility to them is difficult just because they're in some really remote areas. And then just trying to time up the flows with some of those access areas along the Missouri River. I mean, that's probably the biggest thing is just being where the fish are. Just, especially if you don't have a boat or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be a challenge, but it's sure an exciting thing when you can land a massive fish like that and see them. They are a fascinating fish to me. How long have they actually been in the Missouri River?
I would say they've been in the Missouri River about almost as long as the Missouri River's been around.
Yeah.
They have fossil records that date back millions of years. I've seen the number fluctuate from 70 to over 150 million years. They've been around. Probably the biggest unique thing about that paddlefish stock above Fort Peck is, to my knowledge, it's the farthest north and westerly population in the United States. So, and it's an isolated population. So if what's there is there, we don't get fish coming in from other rivers or sections. It's an isolated population. The other thing that's really cool about that Fort Peck stock is it's completely wild. We've never stocked paddlefish.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Not in Fort. Nope, that is a completely wild stock, and we want to continue to manage it that way. That long-term sustainability on a wild stock of fish.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I want to take one more quick break here. and we're going to chat a little bit about Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Truth is, the Montana Outdoor Podcast wouldn't exist without their incredible support. And if you've been enjoying these episodes each week, maybe it's time to support the folks who help make it happen. So here's the question. Do you need a trailer for work, for hauling gear to your next adventure? Or maybe a new truck bed to help keep your life organized, whether it's for work or play? Well then, go see the folks who already get what you're about. If you listen to this show, you've already got something in common with Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. Like you, they love the outdoors. They work hard, and they're dang good at what they do. Their job? Helping people like you get your work done faster so you can get back out in Montana's great outdoors. Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer carries a full lineup of Diamond Sea trailers, gooseneck, equipment, dub trailers, well, you name it. Whether you're hauling a few supplies or towing the big stuff, Diamond Sea trailers are built to handle it all with reliability and ease. They also carry CM truck beds, the strongest, most durable truck beds around. Plus, they service everything they sell. Need your trailer rewired so the lights work the way they're supposed to? They'll take care of that too. Got a new truck? They'll get you set up with the accessories you need, installed and ready to roll. And don't wait until the last minute to schedule your trailer service. Do that ahead of time so your gear's ready to go when you are. They also stock a huge selection of parts for Boss snowplows, CM truck beds, and Diamond Sea trailers. And if it's not in stock, they'll find it. Need financing? Well, they've got you covered there, too. Need a gooseneck or fifth wheel hitch for that rodeo trip or family outing to the great outdoors? Yep, they install those, too. Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer. They're in Missoula at 5680 Expressway. You can call them at 406-549-4243 or check them out online at rmtte.com. That's Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer, rmtte.com. Now let's get back to what Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer helped create, the podcast. Back here on the Montana Outdoor Podcast, Cody Nagel and I have been talking about all kinds of things that go on there in the Milk River Basin and Missouri and all that. Before we get off the topic of paddlefish, which, like I said, is just such a fascinating fish, what do you find as a biologist some of the more interesting things about that, I guess, kind of a prehistoric fish?
Yeah, to me, one of the biggest things is, well, two things. One, how old they can live. I mean, every year we ask anglers to voluntarily submit a section of the lower jaw on these fish from the harvested fish anyway. One of that, the biggest component of that is to see kind of what the age structure of our population is. And what we're looking for there is we want to see young fish coming into the system. These fish don't sexually mature until they're teenagers. Females don't become sexually mature till they're about 16, 17 years old. Males about 9 or 10. So we're looking at, how many young fish are coming into our population, but, also do we have old fish in the system? And every year we see a handful of fish that exceed 60 years old. Last year we saw a fish that's 72 years old. And to think, like as a biologist right now, there's possibly some fish that are going to hatch this year and recruit into the population. And I am going to be buried in the ground and those fish are going to be swimming, 40, 50 years from now. I won't be here, but they will be. So that's one really interesting thing about the fish. The other is, you look at the Missouri River and you're sitting there along the bank, and you're watching all this turbid, muddy water coming by you. And to think, here's all this water. It looks like, how would you notice a difference in 1,000 CFS one way or the other? But these fish can detect that. I mean, the slightest changes in flows will make these fish migrate one way or the other. If the water's dropping a little bit and they don't like it, they'll move back downriver. there's a little bit of a bump or a rise, they will shoot upriver. They can travel 15 to 20 miles in a day. It's just, they're a phenomenal fish. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And I guess being around that long, millions of years, they got to figure it out by
Yeah.
now. I had no idea. I mean, they're almost similar to people as far as how long they live and maturity and all that stuff. That's interesting. I had no idea that so they got to survive a long time before they can even produce young then.
Yeah. And that's one of the big challenges, as a biologist is, and again, when we're looking at the recreation component and allowing folks that opportunity, we're balancing the longevity of these fish. They don't reproduce successfully every year. I mean, they try to, but they need a lot of conditions to align perfectly to see, good year classes produced. And we have seen that a handful of times in the last 15 years. So they're still reproducing, they're still doing okay. But we always keep a close tab on, what's being taken out through harvest, and other mortality events. And then what's coming in, what's the next year class looking like? What's the future look like? Cause that's really important.
It's amazing. It's cool that we have those fish. So many people, we have viewers and listeners from all around the world, and that fish probably gets the most response from people that don't live near Montana and even live in different countries that go, "What in the hell is that thing, and how did it get in the river?"
Yeah.
It's just such a unique thing and different. We're kind of lucky to have that fish, aren't we?
We are, and some of the listeners that have probably, have handled or seen a few of paddlefishes, yeah, no two look alike. There is a lot of differences. You'll see some really dark black ones. You'll see light ones. You'll see some with freckles all over them. There's a lot of individualistic characteristics from one fish to the next. So it's pretty cool. I mean, you catch a perch and they all look the same
Perch.
for the most part. But these paddlefish, yeah, they're unique for sure.
Wow. One of the things before we go, I wanted to touch on, we talked a bit about the Milk River and your area and that, but I wanted to uh, get a little more information about that for our anglers that may have never thought about, fishing the Milk. I like that area. I do. I think it's unique. It's such a fascinating river. A lot of people don't realize that's the second longest river in Montana. A lot of people don't know that one. Missouri, of course, being the longest. What in your area, where would be the best spot for anglers to have luck if they say, "Well, I don't care what I catch, I just want to go catch something," and then talk a bit about all the different species that they can find in that river.
Yeah. So your best angling opportunities are probably going to be from Fresno Dam downstream, to the confluence of the Missouri River. We do have several fishing access sites along the Milk River, the Tailwaters FAS below Fresno Dam. There's a wildlife management area that you can access, right around the Havre area. There's a fishing access site in Malta. So, anglers will have to do a little bit of research. A lot of the land is private, but, stream access law does apply. So if you're willing to wade, you can fish different stretches of the river. I would say those upstream areas around Fresno Dam down through Harlem, you're primarily looking to catch probably, pike, walleye, smallmouth bass. But as you move downstream, you can run into a lot more different species, catfish, possibly sauger, maybe some burbot, but you're looking at like buffalo species, gold-eyed, drum. You just never know what might be on the end of your line once you get past Malta on the Milk River. But yeah, it's a really kind of a hidden gem. I think some of the access difficulties intimidate a few people, but if you're willing to put in the time and just kind of see like, hey, where can I legally access it? And you can find a couple of pools and holes and some good areas, you can have a lot of success on it.
Yeah. One of my favorite areas, going up from the dam on the Missouri, when you hit that confluence, you can go up into, by boat into the milk a little ways. And where that kind of all comes together and then going on up, that can be some really good walleye fishing at times. Really good. So that's a fun place to go.
Yep.
Yeah. So I encourage you to discover this river and don't give up because of these challenges, because those are getting taken care of. In fact, I'm still amazed at how quickly they've moved to repair that St. Mary's siphon and all the things that they're doing. Do you see any kind of challenges that may happen when they are able to turn that back on and get the flow going? Is that going to confuse fish at all, or what do you think is going to happen with all that?
Yeah. No, I don't see any impacts with that being reopened and then that water making it back down into Fresno and eventually into the milk. Again, it just seems like the long-term challenge is always going to be a limited amount of water that can get carried through the system. And, just in my time up here as the fish biologist, whether you're an irrigator, a municipality user, an angler, or a fish, like it is so important. Every year we all sit here and watch the weather. Are you going to get that timely rain in May or June? If you get it, that may have huge ramifications for what your water conditions are going to be for the rest of the summer. If you don't get it, everybody's scrambling going, okay, now what do we do with the limited amount of water, to go around to everybody? So that's going to continue to be a challenge moving forward. And, again, like communicating with reclamation and some of these irrigation districts, those are going to continue so that we can manage these fisheries the best as we possibly can. I'd also just like to say, like, when it comes to Fresno, it's going to be hard to say right now what the impacts are going to look like. But again, I'm trying to find silver linings here. Fresno is really good at growing fish fast. So even if we have a major setback, if we can get, whether it's natural reproduction next spring with some stocking efforts, by 2 or 3 years, we can have a Fresno walleye about 15, 16 inches.
Really?
So yes. Yeah. So that's a silver lining. I mean, I don't foresee impacts as long as we have decent water conditions moving forward. I don't see the impacts lasting 5, 10, 15 years. I think it'll be quick and hopefully folks will get back out to Fresno because it's when everything's going well out there, it is a phenomenal walleye fishery. I mean, it is a walleye factory for 14 to 20 inch walleye. It is a great place to go.
I encourage everyone to utilize these areas. A lot of times we get focused on the big water, but there's a lot to discover out there for sure. Well, Cody, I want to thank you very much for the time you've taken here today. And, I know you're busy, but this is important for us, just as, us anglers love to have access to water. We love to have access to the biologists and learn more about where we're fishing. One last question I did have, it seems to be, and maybe I'm just hearing more about it or that, but it just seems like the smallmouth bass seems to be kind of on the rise these days. I hear more and more people on Fort Peck that are finding them, really starting to have a lot of fun with that fish. They are a fun fish to catch and to deal with. Are the smallmouth bass numbers, are they increasing, or are we just talking more about them these days?
Yeah. Like they are increasing. They're starting to get distributed. I'll just say that, and they're a species that can thrive in a lot of different environments. They can thrive in a lake environment. They can thrive in a reservoir environment. And we're coming to find they can thrive in our cool water rivers. It's hard to say right now, like what the long-term impacts will be, if any. But, anytime a new species starts to thrive, whether, it's a fish we like to target or not, there could be some ramifications for other species. But
Yeah.
I know a lot of the folks out in the field in my position are monitoring these populations, trying to keep track of them. And I guess from an angler's perspective, go out and enjoy them. I guess,
Yeah.
they're here. I mean, it's hard to get rid of fish once they start to establish, and we're fighting these smallmouth bass. They can naturally reproduce in a lot of different environments, and they're doing good in them. Yeah.
Yeah. And they might blend a little better in your areas and that. I know uh, over west of the divide in the Missoula area, Bitterroot Valley area, they have found some smallies in the Bitterroot River, and that could be a pretty catastrophic effect because that fish could dominate that river pretty quickly. And so
Yeah.
they have asked anglers to make sure and do not throw any of those back. Make sure they are removed. But
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would say though, like, I mean, just looking at another species that we're starting to learn more about, at least in our prairie stream system. So like some of these small streams that connect to the Milk River is, northern pike do really well in these systems, so they'll run up these little tributaries and reproduce. And then, you get small pike that thrive in these small prairie systems. And they're too small for anglers to really target or prefer. I mean, we're talking like 8 to 15-inch pike, but those pike are big enough to really do some damage to our native minnow populations that thrive in those prairie systems that feed the forage base to the Milk River. Yeah.
yeah, it's a never ending deal for you
Yep.
guys. You're like a referee trying to get all these fish to deal with each other and anglers and all that. But you guys are doing a good job, and we certainly appreciate all you've done for us. I'm gonna put your email in the podcast description, so if listeners do have some questions for you, hopefully you'll get time to get back to them if they do. And of course, all of you listening, you're more than happy to, you're more than welcome, rather, to get back to me, and I'll track down answers for you as much as I can, as I always do, and I enjoy doing that. So be sure and send me those emails, send me those pictures, and let us know what else you want to know about this area that Cody's been telling us about. And that way, when we have him on again down the road, we can answer some of those questions for you after you've listened and watched this podcast. Anything else before we go, Cody, that you'd like to add before we jump out of here?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah. And if anybody has any questions or, feel free to email me. I will get back to you at some point. So yes. Yep.
All right. Be careful out there in Fresno. Stay away from that whirlpool now. I told everybody, don't get your boat near that thing. That could be interesting. Anyway, Cody, thanks so much. Thanks for all you do, and we'll see you next time when we visit your area.
Thanks for listening to the Montana Outdoor Podcast. It has been brought to you in part by Superior Hardwoods of Montana, home of the largest selection of in-stock high-end wood products and flooring in the western United States. Let them guide you through the woods at superior-hardwoods.com. And by Rocky Mountain Truck and Trailer in Missoula, home of Boss Snowplows, CM Truck Beds, and Diamond Sea Trailers. Just go to rmtte.com for more information. So what did you think of today's podcast? Send your questions and comments to downrigger at montanooutdoor.com. We should be dropping a new podcast this next Saturday. Until then, we will see you soon out in Montana's great outdoors.